This latest Flipped History video. The following video will have 3 learning intentions. The first one is to indicate the consequences of industrial development on society, and the success criteria is that you can explain how industrial development affected society. The second learning intention is to explain the consequences of industrial development on the territory, and the success criteria is that you can describe the consequences on the territory. And the third learning intention is to explain the power relations between unions and the state, and the success criteria is that I can explain the relationship between unions and the state. As we saw earlier, industrialization and urbanization went hand in hand. The working and living conditions of these industrial workers were terrible by today's standards. Men, women, and children were forced to work. Work was hard, physical labor, seasonal in some cases, so men faced the prospects of being laid off. Women worked either in factories or sometimes worked at home, producing goods piecemeal, so they would get paid for the items that they were made. Children were paid at a fraction of what adults were made, and some girls who had to babysit for their younger siblings weren't paid at all. The average wage for a man in Montreal was about $8.25 a week. For a woman, $4.50 a week, and $3 for a boy. People lived in terrible conditions, often crammed in row houses, large families having only a few rooms, no hot water, and no inside washrooms. As a result, the infant mortality rate in Montreal was higher than London, Paris, or New York. Also, we have to remember that this was a society before automobiles, so there were many animals living in the urban environment. Montreal had 3,000 horse stables and 5,000 cow stables in the city limits. So the living conditions of the working class were really terrible, and one of the as the society moved from the 19th into the 20th century was to try to improve the lives of the working class. Working conditions were not any better. Men and women and children were paid low wages and worked hard. The working conditions were difficult as well. Factories were not properly ventilated, machines were dangerous, injuries common, and no health insurance. One of the only avenues that workers had to try to improve working conditions was to stop working, to go on strike. One of the first instances of going on strike happened at the Lachine Canal Works, where workers refused to do any more work. At first, these strikes were kind of results of local conditions and spontaneous. But later, workers began to become more organized, and unions formed. Unions were based mostly around a particular working condition, mostly about a type of job. So you had different unions for different types of workers. And actually, many of these first unions came as a response to industrializations. These were craft or artisan workers who were trying to protect their trades against industrialization. So they fought to get better pay and also for less hours. So the typical working hours were between 10 and 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The 9-hour movement arose in Hamilton, and there was a large strike in Toronto of the typographical union. These were the men that set the type for printing presses. And they won the 9 hours, and that gradually spread to other workers as well. Unions were technically illegal in Canada until 1872, when the power of the working class was seen by the federal government as a way to gain their votes. So the Trade Union Act legalized unions, although they were supposed to register with the government. Striking was allowed, but picketing was technically still illegal under the criminal code. Strikes were often broken up by strike breakers. The police or even the army was called out to maintain order. In Canada, there were another type of union. These were the international unions. The Knights of Labour started in the United States and moved into Canada. Although the Knights were predominantly locally based and didn't really have any kind of cross-Canada success. Unions also depended on the economic cycle. When times were good, union membership went up. When times were bad and factories started to close, the power of unions also declined. So Canada never really, in the 1800s, had any type of unions that were able to come together, so to form a kind of working class consciousness, unlike what was happening in maybe Britain. Unions also played an important social role in cities. They organized picnics, parades, and mechanics institutes, which were some of the first libraries, were started to try to educate the industrial worker. Well, thanks for watching. As you're doing your summary, please consider the following essential question. How did economic development shape Canada?